Hey guys, I've got a little bit of a thought here that I want to share with you. It comes from the book of Genesis, and it comes from a story that maybe we take for granted a little bit. You know, when we talk a lot about stories in the beginning of Genesis and the creation and Adam and Eve and even Cain and Abel, we think of stories that we often share with our kids in Bible class. And sometimes they become so familiar because of we've been learning them since we were kids and teaching them since we were a kid, we kind of miss some things. So I want to turn your attention to the book of Genesis chapter 4. And just to recap, you might know the story already, but Adam and Eve have two sons. The oldest named is Cain, and then they have a son named Abel. And Cain was a worker of the ground. He raised crops, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, and he had flocks of sheep, and maybe goats as well. I'm not sure, but these two young men were asked, I guess, presumably, it doesn't directly say that, to offer a sacrifice. They both offer a sacrifice. And Abel's was accepted, and Cain's was not. Now, the Hebrew writer would later tell us that Cain's was not accepted, or rather, Abel's was accepted because it was offered on faith. So, presumably, there was a lack of faith or trust or something in Cain's offering. It wasn't what was offered, but how it was offered. But in chapter 4, and I just want to bring up part of that text here on the screen for us. I'll do it right here. There is a conversation that actually happens between God and Cain. And I find it not only important, but I find it very, very enlightening to understand our own relationship with the challenge of sin in our life. And again, we recounted the story, but I want to jump back in the story. In verse 3, starting, it says, "And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell." So here you have the picture as presented to us that these two young men present this sacrifice. God respected one, didn't respect the other. Cain ends up upset. Verse 6, though. The Lord comes to Cain, and this is so important to see. This wasn't somebody else came to talk to Cain, to give counsel to Cain, to try to encourage him to do the right thing. The Lord himself talks to Cain in this passage. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? Now listen, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door." Now watch what he says here, because this is so important. "And its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." And hence, this is the problem with sin, or the relationship that we have with sin. Sin kind of hunkers at the door, kind of like a cat ready to pounce, or an animal ready to devour. And God said, it's there, you need to be aware of it, you need to see it, but you need to rule over it. In other words, don't let it rule over you. And hence, why this story is so important. Not just to tell us that Cain killed Abel, or to record the first murder, but to remind us that sin is a real presence in our life. It comes through our own temptations, it comes through our own desires, but as God told Cain, it lingers at the door, but you should rule over it. In other words, it's a choice. We don't have to give in to sin. We end up choosing to. And then it rules over us. I want to just take this time to remind you, whatever you're facing, whatever is in your life, you're not without the power to face or to stand up against those things. God is the power to defeat those things. But we have to make a choice, whether we let sin rule over us, or whether we turn to God and let God reign over us. And that's always our choice. That's always the choice that's before us. Joshua, at the end of his life, after he had led the children of Israel into conquest of the Canaan land and had won so many battles, he knew that choice was sitting right there. And he tells them in chapters 23 and 24 of that book of Joshua, recounts their history and all that God has done. And then he lays out there, he says, whether to serve God is good or wrong, you got to decide. Whether you want to serve the gods of Egypt and the gods of the Amorites and the gods of Canaan, or serve the God. That's your choice. And then, of course, Joshua would say, as for me and my house, I choose to serve the Lord. And I hope that's your choice today, too. I hope this has been encouragement to you. Remember that sin, though it's present, and it desires us, unfortunately, we can rule over it. And better yet, we can turn to a God who's already defeated. I hope that you'll continue to study. I hope that you'll be continued encouraged in your study. And until we see you next time, I hope you have a blessed day.